Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
It's great to be here. And today we're tackling something that feels incredibly urgent yet timeless.
It really does.
We're looking at the machinery of governance itself. We're digging into a text that functions less like a history book and, more like a diagnostic manual.
A diagnostic manual, that's a perfect way to put it. It felt like looking at an MRI of a failing system when I was reading through the material for this.
Right.
The core inquiry of today's deep dive is a heavy one, but it's absolutely essential if we want to understand the moment we're living in. The question is, how do democratic systems degrade into authoritarian rule?
And that word degrade is so important.
Zach, I didn't say how do they get overthrown. I said degrade.
That distinction is it's vital. We often imagine the end of democracy as a sudden explosion, a coup, a tank rolling down the street.
The movie version.
The movie version, exactly. A single evil leader seizing the reins in some moment of dramatic villainy. But the source material we're covering today, On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, argues that this is rarely how it happens in reality.
It's much quieter.
Much quieter and slower. It suggests that the fragility of modern democracy is not an accident. It is a structural vulnerability. It happens through predictable institutional and behavioral dynamics that we can actually map out.
Right. It's a process, not an event. And I want to be clear right off the bat, because this book deals with some heavy historical and political themes. Our goal here isn't to get into some kind of partisan debate.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
That would miss the entire point.
It would.
The relevance here goes far beyond ideology, beyond left versus right. We're looking at the mechanics of legitimacy, the role of institutions, the control of narrative, and maybe most uncomfortably, the psychological normalization of obedience.
That last one is key.
It is. Because when we look at the 20th century, as Snyder does, we're forced to confront a really difficult reality. That freedom, as we know it, is actually the exception, not the rule.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. The default state of political systems, historically, often slides toward tyranny if specific systemic checks are removed, or, more often, just ignored.
So think of this deep dive not as a book review, and certainly not as a prescription for who you should vote for. It is a systems analysis.
Our mission is to map the feedback loops.
Exactly, to map the feedback loops that turn a democracy into a tyranny. We want to see the gears turning before they lock into place.
And to do that, we really need to understand who is guiding us through this history. Timothy Snyder isn't just a historian in the general sense. His focus is incredibly specific.
He specializes in modern Europe, specifically what he calls the Bloodlands.
The Bloodlands. It's a terrifying term. It refers to the territories caught between Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union.
I mean, just the name itself evokes this incredible scale of suffering.
It does. But specializing in that particular nightmare, it gives him a unique vantage point. His expertise isn't just history. It is the study of totalitarian systems and democratic collapse.
So he's not just looking at the big battles or the famous leaders?
No, not at all. He studies the mechanics. How are things like the Holocaust and the Soviet terror administratively and socially possible? He looks at the paperwork, the bureaucracy.
The boring stuff that makes horror efficient.
Precisely. The daily choices of average citizens that made these horrors function. He isn't just looking at the speeches of the dictators. He's looking at the behavior of the postman, the police officer, the neighbor, the cogs in the machine.
And the motivation for this book on tyranny, it comes directly from him seeing those patterns, those mechanics start to recur in our time.
Yes. And he makes a really interesting point early on about the U.S. Founding Fathers. I think we often have this almost mythological view of them.
That they were these supremely confident architects who built a perfect, unbreakable machine.
Right. But Snyder points out that they were actually terrified.
Terrified of what, specifically?
Of what they were building. They designed the American system specifically because they feared the descent into oligarchy and tyranny. They were students of history. They were reading the classics, Aristotle and Plato, who warned that deep inequality brings instability.
And that demagogues exploit free speech to install themselves as tyrants.
Exactly. They knew democracy was fragile. They almost assumed it would try to crash itself, so they built in all these circuit breakers.
Yeah.
Snyder's core argument is that somewhere along the way, we lost that healthy fear. We forgot the system needs active maintenance.
We replaced it with complacency. We assumed the system was on autopilot, that it would just correct itself.
Which brings us to the central thesis of the book, which is just It's so sobering.
It's that we are no wiser than the Europeans of the 1930s or 40s.
That's it. We aren't smarter. We aren't more moral. We don't have some special immunity to this stuff. Our only advantage is that we can learn from their experience.
We can see the roadmap they unknowingly walked down.
We have the benefit of hindsight. We can spot the gears turning.
So let's do that. Let's start taking apart these mechanisms. Let's unpack the first major insight. And honestly, this one hit me the hardest. It's the concept of anticipatory obedience.
This is the system accelerator. I mean, you could argue it's the most critical factor in the early stages of any regime change.
An accelerator. Explain what that means.
The concept is that the most critical power is given freely, not taken by force.
Wait, say that again. Given freely.
Given freely. In times of political uncertainty or a shift in power, citizens start to think ahead. They try to figure out what a more repressive government might want from them, and then they offer it. They do it without even being asked.
That is so profound and so counterintuitive. We think of a tyrant barking orders and people cowering in fear, but Snyder is saying the people act first.
Precisely. Power, especially new power, pauses. It tests the waters to see if it meets resistance. If citizens just instinctively adapt to a new, more repressive status quo, power realizes it can go much, much further, much faster.
So we're essentially giving them permission.
We're training them. Snyder uses the examples of the 1932 German elections and the 1946 Czechoslovak elections. In both cases, after the authoritarian parties came to power, citizens and civil servants voluntarily extended services to the new leaders before those services were legally required.
What kind of services?
Things like aligning their professional organizations with the new party, offering intelligence on colleagues, things like that. It signals to the regime that the cost of repression is low. It's like saying, don't worry, we won't fight back.
The example that really stuck with me from the text was the one from Austria in 1938. This was after the Anschluss, when Germany annexed Austria.
Yes. This is such a critical case study. The German army enters Austria. Now, you might expect the German soldiers, the SS, to immediately start rounding people up and forcing new rules.
But that's not what happened, is it?
Not at first. What Snyder highlights is that the local Austrian Nazis, and crucially people who weren't even Nazis, just regular citizens wanting to get on the right side of the new power, they didn't wait for orders from Berlin on how to treat their Jewish neighbors.
They just started.
They started. Spontaneously. They began capturing Jews and forcing them to get on their hands and knees and scrub the streets to remove symbols of independent Austria.
And what was the reaction of the public? The bystanders?
That's the most terrifying part. Snyder points out that people looked on with interest. They watched. They normalized it in an instant. It became a spectacle. And the terrifying part is the feedback loop this created.
A feedback loop back to the Nazi leadership.
Exactly. This spontaneous, enthusiastic cruelty taught the Nazi leadership what was possible. A leader like Adolf Eichmann, who was there organizing the expulsion of Jews, he learned from the Austrians. He saw this and realized they could push much harder and faster than they had even planned.
So the people's actions accelerated the timeline of terror.
It absolutely did. A few months later, in November 1938, the German Nazis organized Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. You could argue that the anticipatory obedience of the Austrians in March greased the wheels for the violence in November.
If the Austrians had just stood there and done nothing, or even resisted slightly,
The Nazis might have had to recalculate. They might have proceeded more slowly, more cautiously. But the enthusiasm for obedience told them the road was clear.
to bring this to a level that might feel more relatable to the listener, or maybe more disturbing in a different way, Snyder connects this to the Milgram experiment.
Yes, the famous shock experiment at Yale.
I think most of us have heard of this, but it's worth revisiting the details through this lens.
Absolutely. So Stanley Milgram conducted this in 1961. He wanted to test the idea that there was a particular authoritarian personality that explained why Germans behaved as they did during the Holocaust. He actually thought he'd have to go to Germany to find people willing to harm others just because they were told to.
But he started in the U.S.?
He started in New Haven with Yale students and local residents. He never had to go to Germany.
So for anyone who doesn't know the details, can you just walk us through the system of that experiment? How did it work?
The subjects were told they were part of a learning experiment. They were assigned the role of teacher. In another room, there was a learner, who was actually an actor, strapped to a chair with electrodes.
And the teacher was told to do what?
To administer an electric shock for every wrong answer the learner gave, and to increase the voltage with each mistake. The shock generator was clearly labeled with levels from slight shock all the way up to danger, severe shock, and then just XXX.
And as the voltage goes up, the actor in the other room starts to, what, scream?
Exactly. He starts grunting, then shouting. He complains of a heart condition. He begs them to stop. Eventually, he just goes silent, as if he's unconscious or dead.
And all the while, the person in the room with the actual subject, the teacher, is just a guy in a gray lab coat holding a clipboard.
Right, an authority figure. And he says very little, just scripted phrases like, please continue, or the experiment requires that you continue. He has no real power. He can't force them.
And the result was staggering.
Staggering. Most subjects followed instructions. Over 60% of them went all the way to the maximum voltage. They continued to apply what they thought were lethal shocks to a screaming stranger, simply because a new authority figure in a lab coat told them to.
They adapted to the rules of a new setting just like that.
Instantly. They didn't know this authority figure. They had no grievance against the victim. They were often visibly distressed themselves, sweating, arguing with the experimenter. But they kept going.
Milgram famously said, I found so much obedience that I hardly saw the need for taking the experiment to Germany.
And that just chills you to the bone, because it suggests that this anticipatory obedience isn't a cultural quirk of 1930s Germany. It's a human default setting.
So it creates a vacuum that tyranny then rushes to fill?
That's the perfect way to put it. If you obey in advance, you are teaching power what it can do. You are essentially coaching the tyrant on how to oppress you. You're creating the system that will then trap you.
Which moves us to the second core insight, institutions. We talk about institutions all the time, the courts, the press, the unions, the universities.
And in stable democracies, we look at them like they're granite monuments. They're just there, permanent.
But Snyder's argument is that they're not monuments at all.
No. He says they are agreements.
Yeah.
And the systemic failure here, the big mistake we make, is assuming that institutions will protect themselves. They don't.
Because they're not buildings.
They're not buildings. They are composed of people. And if the people inside them and the people they serve don't actively defend them, the institutions just collapse. They fall like dominoes.
There was a really heartbreaking example in the source material from a German Jewish newspaper editorial. This was published on February 2nd, 1933.
Yes, just days after Hitler was appointed chancellor. And the editorial expressed this deep, profound trust in this system.
What did it say?
It said essentially that Hitler and his friends wouldn't dare deprive German Jews of their constitutional rights. They believed that, and I'm paraphrasing here, crucial factors hold powers in check.
So they were trusting the institutions.
They were trusting the inertia of the system. They believed the European atmosphere, the professionalism of the civil service, the weight of the office itself would restrain him. They thought the system was stronger than the man.
It was a fatal miscalculation. They were relying on the checks and balances to work automatically, like a physics engine in a video game or something.
Exactly. And the Nazis had a specific policy for this, a term for it, like Schaltung.
Which means coordination.
Right. And this is a fascinating system dynamic. They didn't necessarily burn down every institution immediately. That's too disruptive. Instead, they coordinated them. They turned them into simulacra.
What do you mean by that, simulacra?
The institution looks the same on the outside. It has the same name, maybe it's in the same building, the people have the same job titles, but it now serves the new order. Its function has been hollowed out and replaced.
So the newspaper still prints, but it only prints propaganda.
Right. The court still sits, and the judges wear their robes, but they enforce arbitrary decrees instead of the law. The university still has professors, but they teach ideology instead of critical thought.
And this happens through what Snyder calls salami tactics.
Yes. You don't destroy the whole sausage at once. That would cause an uproar. You slice off layers of opposition and freedom one by one. You pressure the journalists' union, then you go after a specific newspaper, then you intimidate a judge, then you purge the civil service.
And each slice seems small on its own, manageable.
Exactly. And by the time people realize half the sausage is gone, it's too late. When individuals stop defending these specific institutions, when they say, well, I'm not a journalist, so it's not my problem, there is no collective barrier left.
And that brings us to the very infrastructure of how we even perceive these changes. This is Insight 3, Language and Truth.
This is absolutely critical for our whole crisis in perception theme.
It's the bedrock.
It is. Because controlling language is the precursor to controlling reality. Snyder's argument is that if nothing is true, then no one can criticize power, because there is no basis for the criticism. All you're left with is spectacle and feeling.
He references the work of Victor Klemperer, a philologist, which is someone who studies language, who lived through Nazi Germany. He kept a diary of how the language itself shifted around him.
It's an incredible document. Klemperer noticed that the Nazis didn't just invent a bunch of new words. More often, they changed the definitions and the connotations of existing words to suit this system.
For example,
The people das Volk came to mean only some people, the chosen Aryan group. Everyone else was excluded from the definition of the people. Or the word encounters started being replaced with struggles. Everything became a fight. It narrowed the scope of thought. It made constant conflict seem normal.
Snyder takes this historical observation and applies it to the modern context by identifying four distinct modes of what he calls truth decay.
Right, 4 tactics that dismantle the idea of a shared reality.
Let's run through these because I think you'll immediately recognize them from today's world. The first is open hostility to verifiable reality.
This is the most blunt tactic. It's the presentation of blatant lies as facts. It's not just spin, it's a complete rejection of the evidence of your eyes and ears. The crowd was the biggest ever, when photos clearly show it wasn't.
It's a power move, isn't it?
It's pure power move. To force someone to agree with a blatant lie, or at least to not contest it, is to assert dominance over their perception of reality. You are forcing them to participate in a fiction, which is a form of submission.
Okay, the second mode is shamanistic incantation.
Repetition. Just endless repetition of slogans or nicknames. Think of phrases like Lion Ted or Crooked Hillary from the U.S. context, or Build the Wall, or historically, Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer.
So the goal isn't to make a logical argument.
No, the goal is to create a trance. The repetition bypasses your critical thinking. It displaces facts with an emotional association. You hear the name, and you instantly feel the emotion crooked or lying without ever needing to engage your brain to check if it's true.
It's like branding, but for people.
A very dark form of branding, yes.
Third is magical thinking.
This is the open embrace of contradiction. Snyder uses the analogy of a farmer who claims he can take an egg, boil it, poach it, and then somehow return it to the hen to hatch.
Which is impossible.
Of course. But politically, it sounds like promising mutually exclusive things. We'll cut taxes for everyone, eliminate the national debt, and massively increase spending on the military and infrastructure all at the same time.
It requires the listener to just abandon reason.
It does. It asks you to just believe. It turns politics into a kind of religion, where faith in the leader's power is more important than logic or arithmetic.
And that leads directly to the fourth and final mode, misplaced faith.
This is when truth becomes oracular. It comes from one source. The leader's famous line, "I alone can fix it."
So the leader themselves becomes the source of truth, rather than of facts or evidence being the source.
Precisely. And when you reach this stage, evidence is irrelevant. If the leader says something, it's true because they said it. If evidence contradicts the leader, then the evidence must be fake news or a conspiracy.
Snyder has a devastating line in the book. He says, post-truth is pre-fascism.
It's a very strong statement, but systemically it holds up.
How so?
Fascism as an ideology relies on the primacy of the will, the leader's will over reason. If facts matter, then a leader can be wrong, a policy can fail. But if only the leader's will matters, then facts are just inconvenient obstacles to be swept away.
So post-truth dismantles the basis for individual judgment and even for legal defense. How can you have a trial if there's no such thing as evidence?
You can't. You can only have a show trial.
Let's move to Insight 4, which feels like the next logical step, the exploitation of exception. This is about terror management.
Right. And this draws heavily on the legal theories of Carl Schmitt, who was a Nazi jurist. It sounds academic, but it's brutally simple in practice.
Schmitt's big idea was what?
He argued that the true sovereign, the real power in a state, is not who writes the laws. It's he who decides on the exception. The person who can say, this is an emergency and the normal rules no longer apply.
So the system design here is simple. A leader either manufactures a crisis or exploits a real one to suspend the normal checks and balances.
And the classic historical example is the Reichstag fire in 1933.
The German parliament building burns down just weeks after Hitler becomes chancellor.
It was an act of terror. The facts of who did it are still debated, but that doesn't matter systemically. What matters is how Hitler used it. He immediately claimed the country was under attack by his political enemies, the communists. He created a climate of mass panic and fear.
And he used that moment of shock.
He used it to pass the Enabling Act, which effectively allowed him to rule by decree. That state of exception, that emergency, was never lifted for the entire 12 years of the Third Reich. A single moment of shock enabled a decade of terror.
German citizens traded their real freedom for a fake sense of safety.
Instantly. And Snyder connects this directly to modern times as well, specifically looking at Vladimir Putin's rise in Russia.
He talks about the 1999 apartment bombings.
Yes, a series of bombings in Russia that were officially blamed on Chechen separatists. They created immense fear and provided the pretext for the Second Chechen War, which was incredibly popular and cemented Putin's rise to power.
And he also mentions the Beslan school siege.
Another horrific tragedy, a real crisis.
Yeah.
But Putin used the aftermath to consolidate power, for instance, by ending the direct election of regional governors. He argued it was necessary for security.
So the cycle is, a real or managed terror event creates citizen fear. That fear leads to a demand for safety at any cost.
Which leads to the suspension of rights and laws. And that results in unchecked power for the leader.
And once that power is consolidated, it can then manufacture more fear to keep the cycle going.
It's a perpetual engine of emergency. It's a brilliant and terrifying system for maintaining control.
This connects directly to the final core insight I want to touch on before we map the system out. It's about the narrative engine, how the regime explains time itself.
This is one of Snyder's most original contributions, I think. This framework for understanding our current political malaise. He talks about the politics of inevitability versus the politics of eternity.
Okay, let's break that down. What is a politics of inevitability?
It's the idea that history moves in only one direction, and that direction is inevitably toward liberal democracy and free market capitalism.
This was the dominant vibe after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, right? The famous end of history argument.
That's the perfect example. The thinking was, okay, we won. This is the final form of human government. The big questions are settled. We can just enjoy the ride now.
It sounds comforting.
It is, but Snyder calls it a coma. It induces intellectual laziness and political passivity. If the system self-corrects and progress is inevitable, then citizens don't really need to do anything. We stop asking tough questions. We stop engaging. We just assume the arc of history will bend on its own.
But inevitably that fails. History doesn't stop. Problems like inequality get worse. And that's when we swing to the other pole.
We swing to the politics of eternity.
And what does that look like?
In the politics of eternity, time is no longer a line moving forward. It becomes a cycle, a dangerous loop of victimhood.
What do you mean by that?
The narrative is always the same. The nation is eternally pure and innocent, and it is always under attack by enemies, both external and internal. Slogans like "Make America Great Again" or the Brexit, longing for a lost British Empire, these are politics of eternity.
They reference a mythical past.
A past that never really existed, a golden age of purity, in order to justify a permanent state of struggle and grievance in the present. In the politics of eternity, facts don't matter. Only the myth matters. The feeling of being wronged, the constant threat.
So inevitability makes us fall asleep, and eternity hypnotizes us into a state of permanent crisis.
And crucially, both of them destroy history in the proper sense. History, as a tool for critical thinking, for understanding cause and effect, for seeing patterns, is erased. Inevitability says we don't need history, and eternity says history is just a story of our own unchanging innocence.
Both destroy our sense of agency, the ability to learn and make a different future.
Exactly. They're both recipes for inaction.
Okay, I want to take a moment now to map this all out explicitly. We've talked about these powerful insights, but let's look at the system map. Who are the actors in this drama of democratic decay?
Well, obviously, the first actor is the tyrant, or the demagogue. This is the figure who tests the boundaries, who uses repetition, who exploits the crises. But Snyder places a huge amount of emphasis on a different actor, the professional.
The lawyers, the doctors, the civil servants, the accountants?
Yes, the gears of the system. He makes the point that a regime cannot commit atrocities on a mass scale without them. You need bureaucrats to handle the paperwork for deportations. You need lawyers to write the laws that strip people of their rights. You need doctors to oversee inhumane experiments or sanitize violence.
This is where Snyder's lesson, remember professional ethics, comes in.
It's so critical. He argues that when professionals abandon their specific ethical codes, the Hippocratic Oath for doctors, the commitment to due process for lawyers, in favor of a vague, overriding obedience to the leader, the system becomes terrifyingly efficient at murder and oppression.
Then you have another key actor, the paramilitaries.
These are the forces that degrade the state's official monopoly on violence. In the 1930s, it was the SA brown shirts or the SS. Today, it might look like private security details at political rallies, or armed civilian groups that are encouraged by the leader.
What's the systemic function of these groups?
They blur the lines. When the line between the official police and a violent political group becomes fuzzy, when they work together or the police are told to stand down, the end of the rule of law is very, very close. It creates uncertainty and fear.
And finally, the last actor, the citizen. That's us. We are the variable input.
The citizen is the fulcrum, and as we discussed, the citizen either offers anticipatory obedience or they choose to stand out. Those are the two fundamental paths.
So let's look at the incentives that drive these actors. Why does the system work this way? What's in it for everyone?
For the regime, the incentives are obvious. Power retention, wealth accumulation, and what we could call stability theater.
Stability theater. I like that.
It's the performance of making things look normal on the surface, keeping the shops open and the trains running, while you're systematically dismantling the democratic structure underneath. For the individual, the incentives are much more personal.
Safety, conformity.
Above all else, it's the fear of standing out, of being the nail that gets hammered down. It's also about professional advancement. If you see your colleague get fired for disagreeing, the incentive to agree becomes very powerful.
Snyder references Eugene Ionesco's play Rhinoceros.
It's a brilliant allegory for this. It's a play set in a small town where people, one by one, start turning into rhinoceroses.
And at first, everyone is horrified.
Horrified. It's monstrous. It's absurd. But as more and more people transform, the perspective shifts. The main character, who remains human, starts to feel like he's the freak. He feels lonely and ugly. Joining the herd, becoming a thundering beast, starts to seem like a relief.
It's the psychological comfort of belonging, even if you're belonging to something monstrous.
Exactly. The relief of no longer having to think for yourself. The incentive for the mob is that sense of belonging.
Okay, so we have the actors and incentives. Let's talk about the feedback loops that lock the system in place. We mentioned the fear loop earlier, terror leading to submission, but there's also what you could call the truth loop.
Or the truth decay loop. It starts with an attack on facts. This leads to widespread cynicism. People start saying things like, "What is truth anyway?" Or "They all lie, so what's the difference?"
And that cynicism is dangerous.
It's incredibly dangerous, because when people give up on facts, they start to rely on faith or on a trusted leader to tell them what to think. This inability to critique the leader allows the leader to tell more lies, more brazenly. It spirals downwards into a closed information ecosystem.
And then there's the conformity loop.
This one is very visual. One person obeys. They put the party sign in their window. The next person sees that and feels pressure to do the same. Soon, the entire visual field is filled with symbols of loyalty flags, posters, swastikas in the 1930s, Z symbols on cars in modern Russia.
So resistance begins to seem impossible simply because it's invisible.
If you don't see anyone else resisting, you assume you're alone. You assume it's pointless. This is why Snyder emphasizes small, visible acts. They break the illusion of unanimity.
So bringing this all into the present day, Snyder wrote this book very quickly after the 2016 election. It was intended as a warning for us now. How do these lessons apply to the modern United States or to Europe or other democracies today?
He's very direct about it. He argues that his analysis isn't just about history, it acts as a mirror. The same structural erosion seen in the 1930s is visible in modern hostility to the press, the use of private security at rallies, and the constant questioning of electoral legitimacy.
He talks a lot about the change in our information ecosystem.
He sees this as a massive systemic vulnerability. The shift from print journalism, which is slow and requires verification, to the internet, which is fast and emotional, changes everything. The internet is, as he puts it, two-dimensional. You see a headline, you see an image, you don't see the context, the history. The algorithms are designed to create tribes and to promote spectacle and outrage over patient investigation.
He uses the example of the email bombs of 2016.
Yes, the constant release of hacked emails.
Yeah.
He argues this was a form of mass privacy violation used to distract from larger systemic issues. It turns politics into a reality show, a spectacle of secrets and gossip. We get addicted to the thrill of the secret rather than the hard work of understanding public policy.
And this leads to another modern problem, the normalization of surveillance.
Totalitarianism isn't just a police state with guys in trench coats. It's the erasure of the boundary between public and private life. Snyder has this chilling line, "Tyrants seek the hook on which to hang you."
A hook.
If you have no privacy, if all your emails, texts, and browsing history are collected, the state has a hook for you. Everyone has said or done something embarrassing or technically illegal. If everyone's data is exposed, everyone is vulnerable to blackmail or pressure. Privacy is a defense.
It's the boiling frog dynamic, isn't it? The erosion feels gradual and often boring.
Exactly. It often feels legal or technical. A change to gerrymandering rules, a new campaign finance law, a debate over judicial appointments. It's boring stuff. It's not a tank in the street. But each change provides more leverage until the leverage is total.
We normalize the abnormal. We accept things that would have been shocking a decade ago. We say hate speech is just politics, or that blatant lies are just branding.
And that's how the frog gets boiled, slowly, degree by degree.
This connects so strongly to the whole purpose of our project, Crisis in Perception. We often want to blame a single bad leader. It's an easy answer. We say, if we just get rid of that guy, we're fine.
But the book shows that the leader is only possible because of a system of obedience, of professional complicity, of institutional decay. If you remove the leader, but you leave the citizen's habit of anticipatory obedience and the culture of truth decay, another leader will just step right in to fill that vacuum.
It also highlights so clearly how our perception is shaped by narrative. If we are stuck in that politics of eternity loop, always perceiving enemies everywhere and reliving past grievances,
We can't see the actual structural problems that are causing our pain. It's a form of hypnosis. We're busy fighting ghosts from the past while the foundation of the house is rotting away in the present.
one thing that really struck me is the difficulty of change. Snyder has a lesson in the book called Stand Out, but he's very clear about how hard that is to actually do.
It requires unease. It requires being the odd one out, the person who ruins the party. He tells the story of Teresa Prekarowa, a Polish woman who saved Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II.
And she considered her actions just normal.
She called what she did normal, but statistically, historically, it was profoundly exceptional. The vast majority of people did nothing or were complicit. Most people drift with the system. The system is designed to make conformity feel natural and to make resistance feel eccentric, dangerous, or even insane.
So as we move toward the conclusion here, what does this book really leave us with? What's the shift in vision it provides?
I think it leaves us with a few stark realizations. First, democratic fragility is the norm, not a temporary crisis. Democracy is not a given. It's a daily struggle that requires constant effort.
Second, that obedience isn't always forced, at least not at first. It's often given freely.
And third, that institutions are not walls made of stone. They are just people acting by rules. And when the people change or the rules are ignored, the institutions vanish.
The so what here, the takeaway, seems to be ultimately about agency. Snyder's ultimate point isn't to make us despair. It's about recognizing our own agency within a system.
Exactly. History, he argues, isn't there to make us feel good or bad. It's there to allow us to see the patterns. And if we can see the pattern, we can become co-creators of a different moment. We can choose to act differently.
This is where he brings in the story of Václav Havel, the Czech dissident who later became president after the fall of communism. The parable of the greengrocer.
It's such a powerful little story. Havel imagines this greengrocer who runs a fruit and vegetable shop in a communist country.
And every day, he has to put a sign in his window.
Right, a sign with the official slogan, "Workers of the world, unite." Now, the greengrocer doesn't believe it. The people who see it don't believe it. He doesn't even really think about it. He just does it because everyone else does it, and he wants to avoid trouble with the authorities.
It's a small ritual of submission. It's anticipatory obedience in action.
Yes. But then Havel asks the crucial question. What happens if one day he just takes the sign down?
Which happens.
By refusing to display the slogan, he breaks the spell. He withdraws his consent from the system's big lie. It's a tiny act, but it's an act of living in truth, and it exposes the fiction that everyone supports the regime. It forces the system to react.
And if enough greengrocers take down their signs?
Then the whole facade of total loyalty begins to crumble. Snyder's point is that we are all, in our own way, greengrocers. We all have signs we are asked to display every day, whether it's repeating a lie on social media, looking away when a neighbor is harassed, or just cynically checking out of the political process altogether.
So the real power is in that small refusal. The refusal to obey in advance.
Yes, that is the beginning of becoming a historical generation that repairs the time. Snyder ends with a quote from Shakespeare from Hamlet. The time is out of joint.
Oh, cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right.
We are right now in a moment where the cozy inevitability of democracy has shattered. The time is out of joint. And the listener is left with a question. Will you slide into the easy hypnosis of the politics of eternity, that loop of cynicism and victimhood? Or will you, in some small way, help to set the time right?
That is a lot to mull over. We've covered the mechanics of tyranny, from the psychological urge to obey all the way up to the grand narratives that put entire nations to sleep.
It's a heavy topic for sure, but understanding the machine is the only way to avoid becoming just another one of its gears.
Full credit to Timothy Snyder and the book On Tyranny. We've only really covered the structural core here, but there are 20 full lessons in the book, and we highly, highly encourage you to read the source material.
It's a very short book, but it is incredibly dense with insight. It's well worth your time.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.